So this is the Git Basics workshop with me, Anna. I'm going to first just take a moment to introduce myself so everyone can kind of know who I am, who is this person that's giving this presentation. So my name is Anna Skoulikari, and I would describe myself as like a multi-hyphenate creative / techie. I've done a lot of things in my career. I started off in tech working as a UX designer. That was when I was living in London. And after a while of working as a UX designer, I decided I want to learn to code. Basically, as a UX designer, I felt like I could design digital experiences. So I was sort of like the architect, but I had no idea how those digital products and experiences were actually built. So I wasn't the construction company in a way. So when I moved to Barcelona, which is where I'm joining you all from, I attended a coding bootcamp and I learned to code. And then I got a job as a front-end developer. And while I was working as a front-end developer, I realized that I really needed to understand how to use Git in order to work smoothly with my coworkers. I had been introduced to Git when I was in my coding bootcamp, and I knew the basics of it. I'd used it for my own projects, but in my coding bootcamp, I only did individual projects, no group projects. So I'd only used it on my own. So I'd only used the very basic features. And so when I started working in my front-end developer job, I realized I really was scared of Git. I was scared that whenever I had to do something that I thought was complicated using Git, I was going to destroy the repository. I was going to do something horrible. So I kept on having to ask for the senior developers to come over and help me with various Git tasks. And at some point, I just realized, you know what, I'm going to conquer my fear and I'm going to master Git. I'm going to really study it and understand it deeply so that I don't have to be afraid anymore. And while I was doing that, at some point, I really did gain my Git confidence and I was a lot more comfortable using it. And while I was learning it in my Git learning journey, I realized that a lot of the resources out there were not user-friendly for people coming into tech from non-technical backgrounds. And so at some point, I just realized, I think I can teach Git in a more simple and humanly understandable way. So I ended up making an online course teaching Git, which this workshop is based on that online course. So this is the online course. It's on Udemy. And it ended up becoming a highest rated course. So I really thought, okay, I think I found a way to teach it in a more simple way that helps people. So this workshop is based on that. Now I work as a technical writer. By making this online course, I realized I really like tech communication and I like explaining topics, technical topics in simple ways. So now I work as a technical writer at a company called Mambu, which is in the fintech space. So let's get on to some announcements and then we'll get started with the presentation. First of all, revision alert. You might know some of the concepts and topics we're going to talk about today, but I'm hoping that I can present them to you in a different way and to help build a different mental model that you maybe have had before with Git. So even though some of these things you might be like, I know what a commit is or I know what a branch is, stay open-minded. Maybe the way that I'll present it will reveal something new to you. Also, this is a just watch presentation. In other words, you don't need to code along. It's just watch, take in all the stuff that I'm going to be communicating today and enjoy. Also, feel free to use the chat for communication, but I won't be looking at the chat during the presentation. I will only look at it at the end. And in terms of duration, the workshop itself usually lasts about half an hour. So the actual content. At the end, I definitely want to leave time for questions, so Q&A. Whether that's questions about Git or questions about getting into tech or my tech journey. But the actual content is about half an hour. I think Git is quite an intense topic. So having half an hour of concentrated attention is good. So in terms of what we're going to be covering today, we're going to go over Git and GitHub and what they are and how they're different. We're going to be going over making a commit, but really in depth. Then I'll go over the staging area, quite in depth, and then I'm going to touch upon what branches really are. And throughout this entire presentation, I'm going to be uncovering some common misconceptions. The issue with Git is that a lot of us learn it really quickly, or we get introduced to it, or we just start using it, but we don't really understand it very deeply. And sometimes we learn things and they're not exactly the way we thought they were. So I'm going to be uncovering some of these misconceptions. So what are Git and GitHub? I see the terms Git and GitHub being used interchangeably really, really often. And it's really important to say that Git and GitHub are not the same thing. Git is a version control system. It allows us to keep track of all the versions of our code and to collaborate with other people. It's a program that you download onto your computer. For anyone that, for example, has used Microsoft Word, that's a program that you have downloaded on your computer. And Git is also a program that you download onto your computer. On the other hand, GitHub is a company that allows you to host projects that use Git on a remote server somewhere or in the cloud. There are other companies other than GitHub that do the exact same thing, such as GitLab or Bitbucket. It's just that GitHub was smart enough to use the word Git in its name, which was very clever. And so you can kind of think of GitHub as like Google Drive. It's like a way to store things in the cloud. So in order to show this more explicitly, if I go onto my computer and I go to my terminal and I type in git -- version and press enter, we can see that I can see the version of Git that I have installed on my computer, because like I said, Git is just a program that you install on your computer. On the other hand, if I were to type in GitHub -- version and then press enter, it's going to tell me I have no idea what you're talking about, because GitHub isn't a program downloaded on my computer. GitHub is simply a company that allows me to host my projects that use Git on a remote server somewhere. So let's get started with the first meaty topic in my presentation, making a commit in depth. So when we first start learning Git, we often come across these diagrams. And whereas these are a good starting point to start to kind of understand some of the parts of Git, they can sometimes be a bit misleading in the way that they show the different parts of Git and how they connect. So in my workshop today, I'm going to be offering up a new mental model of how Git works. So let's start building that now. The very first thing that we need, if we're going to start using Git, is to actually have a project. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to make a project folder. In order to do that, in my terminal, I'm going to go onto my desktop. In order to do that, I'm going to use the command cd and then type in desktop. CD stands for change directory. So we're going into the desktop directory. And we can see now that we're in that directory. And here I'm going to make my project folder. In order to make my project folder, I'm going to use the mkdir command, which stands for make directory, and then pass in the name of the directory that I'm going to create. So I'm going to call it novel, because today I'm going to be working on my novel. And I'm going to press enter, and we'll see that my project directory will be created. There it is. So I've made my project directory. I can open that up so that we can see that here, and I can see my file system as well. And the next thing we want to do is we want to create our repository or initialize our repository. Now, first of all, in the terminal, I'm going to go into my project folder. So again, cd, change directory, and then I'll pass in the name of the project folder that I want to go into. And we're in that project folder. And before I make my repository, I want to point out that there's two kinds of files in our file system. There are hidden files and there are visible files. So if I go into my user, for example, normally the only thing you can see is visible files. But there's also another kind of file called a hidden file. And on a Mac, in order to see hidden files, you press Command-Shift-Dot, and you can see all these grayed out files. A lot of hidden files start with a dot, like their file name starts with a dot. In a Windows operating system computer, I think you would need to go into your settings in order to see hidden files. So I just wanted to point that out before we go to make our repository. So now to go to our folder. So our project as well as in the terminal. And we're going to do in order to initialize or create our repository. So that's the git init command. I'm going to press enter. And we can see now that this .git folder has been created. And in the terminal, it says initialized empty git repository in users Anna desktop novel. Let's open this up. All right. So inside this .git directory, and directory is just another word for folder. They're the same thing. We can see that there's a bunch of folders and files, and they may seem like gibberish at the moment, but we're going to be looking into what some of these things are throughout the presentation. So let's go back to the presentation. So all we've done at this point is we've created our project folder, and inside our project folder, we've initialized or created our repository. Now I want to quickly distinguish between these two. All right, so our project folder is basically what represents our working directory. The working directory is sort of like a workspace or a workbench. It's where you can add files, you can delete files, and you can edit your files. On the other hand, we have the .git folder. And the .git folder is basically what represents our repository. And inside our repository, there's two more spaces that. First of all, we have the staging area. The staging area is sort of like a rough draft space. It's where you can really decide what you want to include in your next commit, or in the next version of your project. You can add updated files to the staging area and remove updated files. And then we have the second space, which is the commit history. So once you make a commit, the commit goes into your commit history. Now, what is a commit? A commit is basically a version of your project. A very common misconception that people have is that they think that a commit is like the changes from one version of your project to another. But that's not the case. A commit represents a standalone version of your project. A commit has a reference to every single file and folder that is part of that version of your project. So that's our very first misconception debunked. Commits are not changes. Commits are standalone versions of our projects. This is one of the most important things to understand about Git. Another thing about commits is that each commit has a 40-character commit hash. A commit hash is basically like a name for a commit. It's a way to refer to it, basically. So the very first thing that we want to do in our project folder now is to add our very first file. In order to do that, I'm going to use a source code editor called Visual Studio Code. I'm opening it up. I'm going to open up the novel folder. So I'm going to go open up novel. And I'm going to add the very first file to my project. We can see that there's no files in my project, and here we can see there's no files. So I'm going to add the first file, and I'm going to call it chapter1.txt. So this is chapter 1 of my incredible novel that I'm going to write today. And I'm just going to say chapter 1, incredible novel started, and save. All right. The next Git command that I'm going to introduce is Git Status. So what Git Status is going to tell me is it's going to tell me the state of my working directory and of my staging area. And it's going to tell me whether there's a difference between the two of them. So if I type in Git Status here, and then I press enter, Git is going to tell me that there are no commits yet. And that's understandable because I haven't yet made any commits. And it's going to tell me that there is an untracked file called chapter1.txt. Basically, what Git is telling me right now is that there is a file in my working directory, but this file is not yet part of my repository. This file is not yet being version controlled. So let's go see that in the diagram. All right, we have a file in the working directory, but this file, yes.
And not to just jump in, so sorry, but when you're sharing your terminal, could you increase your font size? Because some people are having a difficulty reading it. It's quite small.
Is this okay?
Can you zoom into it if you press?
Yeah, I think I've zoomed in now. Is it better, or should I make it a bit bigger?
It's better for me. Let's see if anyone in the chat has anything to say. It is much better already. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Wait. Let me just.
Yeah. We want them really big, so maybe just a little bit more.
Oh. Okay. Yeah. There.
What if you press Command plus while you're focused within your?
Yeah. That's what I've done.
Oh. Okay. It's okay for me. A bit bigger.
A bit bigger.
Yeah. Sorry. Is
still
that
bigger?
Yeah, I think. Yeah, the issue is that it's in a small box. Yeah, that's fine. We're good now. So sorry to interrupt. So if you just want to restart your sentence.
No, don't worry about it.
Thank you so much. Sorry.
No, don't worry. I'm glad that you pointed it out.
Yeah. Okay. I'm gonna leave, and then thank you so much.
Okay. So where was I? Let me just. Okay, so we have a file in our working directory, and this file is not yet part of our repository. It's not yet part of the staging area. We haven't added it to the staging area yet, and we haven't made any commits yet. So the next thing that we want to do is we want to actually add this file to the staging area. So let me just move this over here then. Let me just, All right, so we want to add this file to the staging area. And in order to do that, Git has already actually told us how we have to do that. It says, use git add to track. Now, before I do that, I want to point out, in our .git directory, there is no file called index at the moment, but that's soon going to change. So let's use the git add command. And then in order to add this file to the staging area, I can either type in the file name, so chapter1.txt, or I can pass in a dot, which represents my current directory. If I have a lot of files, I sometimes will do this just to add all the files in one go. So we're adding this file to the staging area. We're going to press enter. And now you can see here in our .git folder that an index file was created. So the index file is basically what represents our staging area. And now if I type in Git Status, Git is going to tell me there are still no commits, but now you do have changes to be committed. In other words, there is an updated file in your staging area, and if you make a commit, that updated file will be included in your commit. So let's go see that in the diagram. So we have our file here, and now we've added that file to the staging area. It's really important to note that this file is not moved from the working directory to the staging area. It is copied over from the working directory to the staging area. So this is a common misconception debunked. Files are not moved from the working directory to the staging area. Files are copied over from the working directory to the staging area. All right. So now the last thing to do is to actually make a commit. In order to make a commit, we use the Git Commit Command and pass in the -m option. And then we type in a message. I'm just going to say adding chapter 1. If you're working on a coding project, it's important to have descriptive commit messages, and often your team members will have agreed on what sort of commit messages they want. So I'm going to press enter, and my commit has been made. Now I'm going to use another Git command called git log. And what the git log command is going to do is it's going to give me a list of all my commits in my repository in reverse chronological order. So I'm going to press enter. And here I can see my commit. My commit has a commit hash, and that is the 40 letters and numbers that represents kind of the name of the commit, or a way to refer to it. It's telling me who made the commit and also when they made the commit. And it's also giving me the commit message. All right, so there we go. We've made our commit. And now we're moving into the second part of the presentation, where I'm going to go over the staging area in depth. So we made our commit here, and there's a very common misconception that when you make a commit, your staging area is wiped clean. But that's not the case. So whenever you're working on a project, you're looking at a particular version of your project, right? So at any point in time, you are on a commit. You're looking at a version of your project. And it's basically all the files that are part of that commit that will be in the staging area. So the staging area is not empty. The staging area has all the files of the commit that you're currently on. In order to explore the staging area in more depth, we're going to be looking at another project that I prepared. In this project, I've already made one commit. And in this project, I have 4 files: chapter 1, chapter 2, chapter 3, and chapter 4. So let's go check out that project. The project is called Novella. So I'm going to go out of my novel folder, and I'm going to go into my Novella project folder. I'm going to do the same thing in my Finder, as well as in my source code editor. I'm just going to open up a new window. And I'm in the Novella. Oh. You guys can see it here on my desktop as well. I prepared it beforehand. All right. So let me just make this a bit smaller. So in my Novella folder, project folder, if I use the git log command, you can see that I already have my first commit there. And now if I use the git status command, it's going to tell me that there's nothing to commit, working tree clean. What Git is telling me right now is that my working directory and my staging area are the same. I haven't edited any files in my working directory that I can add to my staging area to include something new in my next commit. So what we're going to do now is we're going to go edit some files and change this. So I've decided, let's say, to work on chapter 3 and chapter 4 of my Novella. So I can go into the chapter 3 file. This is my file. It's empty. I'm just going to type in chapter 3, working on this chapter. And then I'm going to save that. And I'm also going to work on my chapter 4, more work on chapter 4, and save that as well. So now I've edited 2 files. And if I go into my terminal and I type in Git Status, Git is going to tell me, okay, you've edited 2 files. So now there are 2 files in your working directory that have been edited. And if you'd like, you can add them to the staging area to include them in your next commit. So I'm going to add them both to my staging area. Like I mentioned last time, I'm just going to use a dot in order to not have to type out their full names. But I've added them to the staging area now. And if I use the git status command again, Git is going to tell me that these changes, these updated files, have been added to the staging area. So let's go see that in the diagram. All right. I went and edited chapter 3 and 4. And so it's almost like they went from being version 1 of the file to being version 2 of the file. Then I decided I wanted to add these into my staging area so that they could be included in my next commit. So it's almost as if the version of the file in the staging area got updated. But now what happens if I actually decide that, you know what, the work that I did in my chapter 4 file, I'm not yet ready to include that in my next commit. I don't want to save that. I don't want it to be part of the next version of my project. So I actually want to take that updated file out of my staging area. And that's why I refer to the staging area as a rough draft space, because you can really decide what you want to include in the next version of your project or in your next commit. So if I want to take this file out of my staging area, all I have to do is type in Git Reset, pass in head, and then the name of the file that I want to take out of the staging area. So chapter 4.txt. Press enter. And now Git is telling me it's unstaged the changes. If I type in Git Status now, it will tell me, you have a file in your staging area, which is chapter 3.txt, but you also have a file that you've edited in your work is no longer in the staging area. So now if we make a commit, it will only be the updated version of the chapter 3 file that will be included in my next commit. So let's go ahead and make that commit, git commit -m. And I'm going to pass in a message, and I'm going to just say second commit, but normally, like I mentioned, your commit messages should be a lot more descriptive. I'm going to press enter. And now if I use that git log command again, the one that gives me all the commits in my repository in reverse chronological order, I will see that I have my first commit, and then I also have my second commit. All right, let's go see that in the diagram. So I decided to take the chapter 4 file, the updated version of it, out of the staging area. So that reverts back to being the version 1 of that file. And then I made another commit. Notice that the commit points back to the other commit because this is the parent commit of this commit. All right. Now to head to the last part of my presentation, branches. So we're going to focus on these 2 commits that are part of our commit history. And we're going to explore what branches are in Git. We've been seeing the word branch in some of the text that Git has been like writing after the commands. So let's go explore what branches are. In order to see that, we're going to go into the .git folder. Inside this folder, we're going to go into the refs folder. And inside the refs folder, we're going to go inside the heads folder. And here there's a file called master. I'm going to open up this file. Inside this file is a commit hash. So what are branches? Branches are simply pointers to commits. This commit hash that's in that master file is the same commit hash that is here. So it is the commit hash for my second commit. And what you can see here is that we have the commit hash, and then we have a pair of parentheses, and we have master in those parentheses. In other words, master is pointing to this commit. So let's go see that in the diagram. We have master, and it's a pointer to this commit. So branches are simply pointers to commits. The big misconception to debunk here is that branches are not like true branches. They are simply pointers to commits. And this is a really common misconception also because of what a lot of other diagrams show, even in GitHub, the way that branches are represented. So this is a really, this is one of the most common Git misconceptions, basically. So let's explore branches a bit further. What if we want to create another branch? In order to create another branch, we're going to use the git branch command. And then we're going to pass in the name of a branch that we want to create. I'm going to call my new branch feature 1. Now you can see here in the refs folder, master. When I press enter and I execute this command, you're going to see that another file was created, feature 1. And if I open that file up, I'm going to see feature 1 branch has the exact same commit hash that the master branch has. So feature 1 is just another branch now pointing to my second commit. And if I use the git log command, I'm going to see that as well. I can see here I have my second commit, and in the parentheses I have master and I have feature 1. So whenever you make a branch, it points to the that you're on when you make that branch. Let's see that in the diagram. So we have our master branch pointing to our second commit. And now we also have the feature 1 branch pointing to the second commit. Now, we've been seeing this thing called head in capital letters. What is head? In order to explore that, let's open up this file that's called head that's in our .git folder. What's in there? All right, so here it's telling us inside the rest folder, inside the heads folder, there's a master file. Ooh, sorry. So basically head is a reference of which branch you are currently on. So here it's telling us you are on the master branch. It's like a pointer to the branch that you're currently on. And you can literally see that head is literally pointing to master. So we are currently on the master branch. We can see that in our diagram as well. So here we have the master branch. And here we have head pointing to the master branch. All right. Now we are on the master branch, but what if we want to switch into the feature 1 branch? In order to change branches, we're going to use a command called git checkout, and then we pass in the name of the branch that we want to check out. So in our case, that's feature 1. I'm going to press enter. And Git is going to tell me you switched to branch feature 1. And now if I go and open up the head file again, we're going to see that now it's actually changed. Now it's referencing feature 1. And if I use that git log command again, we can see that now head is pointing to feature 1, and it's no longer pointing to master. So let's see that in the diagram. So head is pointing to master, and then head changes to point to feature 1, which means that now we're on the feature 1 branch. Finally, what happens if we make another commit? So if I use the Git Status command, I can see that I actually have a file that I've edited that's in my working directory, and I can simply add this file to my staging area and make a commit. So I'm going to use the git add command, add that file to the staging area, and I'm going to make a commit. This is going to be my 3rd commit. Again, you all will make more descriptive commit messages. And then press enter. And if I type in git log now, we can see that we have the 1st commit, the 2nd commit, and the 3rd commit. And now we can see that master is still pointing to that 2nd commit, but now feature 1 is pointing to this 3rd commit. And that goes to show that whenever you make a commit, It's the branch that you're currently on that updates to point to the latest commit. So we see that in the diagram. We've made a commit, and now feature 1 updates to point to the latest commit. All right, so that was the introductory Git workshop. These were just some basic concepts, but just maybe presented in a different way than you've seen before. If they've been presented the same way that you've learned them before, then I apologize. I hope it was still a good refresher. I hope that this was helpful and that it helped you to build a mental model of how Git works with some of the basic concepts. Obviously, there's more advanced things later with merging and with working with local repositories and remote repositories. But I'm hoping that this was helpful. So what we covered was the differences between Git and GitHub. We went over making a commit in depth. We went over the staging area in depth, and we went over what branches are. Branches are simply pointers to commits. So I might share some of these links in the chat if anyone is interested. I have my online course, and a lot of the videos are also on YouTube. And if anybody wants to connect with me, then I can drop my LinkedIn if anybody wants to connect on there.